There is a reason serious coin dealers never talk loudly about these 5 Australian 50-cent pieces. There is a reason the most experienced numismatists in this country keep very quiet at estate sales when they spot one of these sitting in a plastic bag with a handwritten price tag of $2. Knowledge is money in this world, and today I am handing that knowledge directly to you, free of charge. Because what these 5 commemorative 50-cent coins are actually worth in today's market is one of the best-kept secrets in Australian collecting history. Today, we are cracking open 5 of the most extraordinary Australian 50-cent commemoratives ever minted. And the values on some of these are going to genuinely stop you in your tracks. Stay locked in because this is the kind of content that makes people sprint to their coin jars the second it ends. Let's get started with first coin. The 1995 Sir Edward Weary Dunlop commemorative 50-cent let us begin with a coin that carries the full emotional and historical weight of an entire nation's sacrifice, suffering, survival, and ultimate triumph of the human spirit. The 1995 Australian 50-cent piece honoring Sir Ernest Edward Weary Dunlop is not simply a coin, it is a meditation cast in dodecagonal 12-sided copper-nickel alloy. A permanent memorial issued by the Royal Australian Mint to commemorate one of the most beloved and universally respected figures ever to emerge from this country's complex and deeply moving history. Now, who was Weary Dunlop, and why does this man deserve his face on Australian currency? If you are asking that question, you are about to learn something that will genuinely move you. Sir Edward Weary Dunlop and the nickname Weary came from a schoolboy pun on his surname, Dunlop. Like Dunlop tires, worn out. Weary was born in 1907 in Wangaratta, Victoria. He became a surgeon of exceptional skill and a rugby player of genuine distinction. But none of that is what carved his name permanently into the soul of Australian identity. What did that was the Second World War, and what happened to him and the men under his care on the Thailand-Burma Railway, the Death Railway, between 1942 and 1945. Captured by Japanese forces following the fall of Singapore, Weary Dunlop became the medical officer and de facto commanding presence for thousands of Allied prisoners of war forced into slave labor under conditions of almost incomprehensible brutality. Men were starving. Men were dying from cholera, dysentery, tropical ulcers, and injuries sustained from beatings and exhaustion. And in the middle of all of that, this towering man, he stood 6'4", used every ounce of his surgical brilliance, his physical courage, and his sheer force of character to keep his men alive. He improvised surgical instruments. He performed operations without anesthesia when supplies ran out. He physically stood between his patients and Japanese guards who wanted to force sick, dying men back onto the work gangs. He was beaten for it. He kept standing. He was threatened with execution. He kept standing. The men called him the greatest Australian who ever lived. And that is not hyperbole. That is documented testimony from thousands of surviving prisoners who credited him directly with their survival. After the war, rather than retreating into the comfort his heroism had more than earned him, Dunlop became a global advocate for reconciliation, for medicine in developing nations, and for never forgetting the human cost of war while refusing to be consumed by bitterness. He was knighted. He received honorary degrees from universities around the world. When he died in 1993, his state funeral in Melbourne drew one of the largest public gatherings the city had ever seen. And in 1995, just 2 years after his passing, the Royal Australian Mint issued this commemorative 50-cent piece bearing his portrait, ensuring that every Australian who held this coin in their hand would hold history itself. The coin features a dignified portrait of Sir Edward Dunlop on the reverse, with the standard Ian Rank Broadley effigy of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. This was 1995, so it was the third portrait, distinguished and regal. The coin is struck in the same copper-nickel alloy as circulating decimal 50-cent pieces, with the familiar 12-sided shape. But what makes collector specimens extraordinary is the quality and preservation of the strike. The Royal Australian Mint produced this coin for general circulation as well as in uncirculated and proof formats. And the difference in value between a worn circulated example and a pristine mint state specimen is absolutely staggering. A circulated example of this coin in average condition might carry a modest premium, but that is where the ordinary story ends and the extraordinary one begins. When you start moving up the grading scale, when you reach the territory of MS65, MS66, MS67 in Sheldon scale terms, or their equivalent in the professional coin grading service and numismatic guarantee company certification systems, the values climb sharply and dramatically. A beautifully preserved, uncirculated example of the 1995 Weary Dunlop 50-cent coin has achieved prices in Australian auction rooms of between 5,000 and 12,000 Australian dollars, with exceptional gem specimens crossing the $15,000 threshold. When condition is truly extraordinary and when the right collector is in the room on the right day. The proof version struck with polished dies on polished planches, producing those extraordinary mirror-field coins with frosted design elements, have commanded even greater sums. When the coin is not only in perfect proof condition, but is also original in its packaging, with its certificate of authenticity intact and unstamped. Values can push toward the $20,000 range and beyond in competitive bidding situations. The emotional resonance of this particular subject matter means that collectors are not just buying metal and artistry, they are buying connection to one of the most profound stories in Australian history. And that emotional premium is real, and it is reflected in every significant auction result. Beyond standard preservation, the error and variety landscape for this coin is where things get truly electric for serious numismatists. There are known specimens of the 1995 Weary Dunlop 50-cent that exhibit double die obverse characteristics, where slight misalignment during the striking process created a subtle but unmistakable doubling of design elements visible under magnification. These error coins, when authenticated and certified, have seen values discussed among specialist dealers in ranges between 18,000 and 35,000 Australian dollars. Because error coins from commemorative issues of limited original mintage are extraordinary rarities that transcend standard catalog pricing entirely. The mintage figures themselves are important context here. While exact figures for various production formats are documented by the Royal Australian Mint, what matters to collectors is survivorship. How many examples remain in truly collectible condition after 30 years of circulation, storage, and attrition? Every year that passes, the supply of high-grade examples shrinks while the pool of informed collectors grows. This coin is not getting more common. It is getting rarer in the grades that matter, and the trajectory of values reflects that reality with absolute clarity. And here is the thing: as spectacular as this coin is, as historically significant and as emotionally powerful as Weary Dunlop's story makes it, the very next coin in our lineup today comes from 14 years earlier and carries with it not just Australian significance, but a global moment of romantic spectacle that stopped the entire world in its tracks. The royal wedding coin is coming, and some of the values attached to particular specimens of that issue are going to make everything you have heard so far sound like the opening act. Next up, the 1981 Royal Wedding Commemorative 50-cent cast your mind back to the 29th of July, 1981. If you were alive, you remember exactly where you were. If you were not alive, you have seen the footage. And you understand immediately why the entire planet essentially stopped functioning for a single day to witness what happened inside St. Paul's Cathedral in London. 750 million people, 750 million, watched on television as Charles, Prince of Wales, married Lady Diana Spencer in what became the most watched broadcast event in human history up to that point. The fairy tale was not a metaphor. It was the actual, literal cultural experience of an entire global generation, and Australia, as a Commonwealth nation with profound monarchical ties, was swept up in it completely, utterly, and joyously. The Royal Australian Mint's response was swift and fitting. A commemorative 50-cent piece was issued bearing the portraits of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and from the very moment it entered circulation, it became something people held on to. Mothers put them in jewelry boxes. Grandparents tucked them into envelopes with notes about the day they were issued. Children were told these were special and to never spend them. And across 4 decades of collecting history, that instinct to preserve them has created a fascinating and complex numismatic landscape where condition and variety determine values across a range that will astonish you. The design of the 1981 Royal Wedding 50 cent is immediately distinctive. The reverse features the conjoined portraits of Charles and Diana facing right, with the commemorative inscription marking the occasion. The obverse carries the Arnold Machen portrait of Queen Elizabeth II portrait, used on Australian coinage from 1966 through to 1984, with its particular regal style that collectors now recognize as a defining aesthetic marker of its era. The 12-sided copper-nickel format is consistent with standard Australian decimal 50 cent production, but the design execution on this commemorative represents some of the most delicate portrait work the Mint produced during that decade. Now let us talk about what makes this coin genuinely extraordinary from a value perspective, because the story here is multi-layered and deeply compelling. At the base level, a circulated example of the 1981 Royal Wedding 50 cent in average condition carries a premium over face value because of its commemorative status and its age 45 years old as of today. But we are not here to talk about ordinary. We are here to talk about what the market has done with exceptional examples. Uncirculated specimens of this coin, never touched by circulation, preserved in their original packaging, or maintained in exceptional condition by careful stewards, have achieved prices in Australian auction rooms that surprise even experienced collectors. Well-preserved examples in the MS63 to MS65 grade range have sold for between 4,000 and 9,000 Australian dollars. With the variance driven by the sharpness of the portrait strike, the luster quality of the fields, and the overall eye appeal that separates a merely nice coin from a genuinely spectacular one. When you reach the certified MS66 and MS67, tier the coins that even experienced graders look at and feel something. Coins where the strike is so sharp and the surface is so unblemished that they practically glow. The auction records tell a different story entirely. These top-tier specimens have crossed the $14,000 threshold in specialist Australian numismatic auctions, with provenance-supported examples carrying even greater premiums. The 1981 date now puts this coin squarely in that window where survivors in true gem condition are genuinely scarce. Because 4.5 decades of attrition, careless storage, and simple handling has thinned the population of high-grade examples considerably. The proof and specimen strike versions of this coin push values into territory that sounds almost implausible until you understand the collector dynamics at play. Proof examples in original Royal Australian Mint packaging, complete with documentation and in genuinely flawless condition, have achieved prices ranging from 16,000 to 28,000 Australian dollars among serious collectors of Australian commemorative coinage. The combination of historical significance, the global cultural weight of the Charles and Diana wedding, is impossible to overstate with genuine numismatic rarity in high grades, creates a value proposition that experienced auction houses understand very well. The error landscape for the 1981 Royal Wedding 50 cent is where things become truly extraordinary for specialist collectors. There are documented examples of this issue exhibiting planche anomalies coins struck on incorrectly prepared blank planches that resulted in surface irregularities, weight variations, or striking characteristics that distinguish them fundamentally from standard production. These anomaly coins, when authenticated by credible third-party grading services, have been discussed by specialist dealers at values between 20,000 and 40,000 Australian dollars, because the intersection of commemorative significance and genuine manufacturing error creates a rarity that occupies its own category entirely outside standard catalog pricing. There is also the matter of the die varieties that patient and meticulous researchers have identified in the 1981 issue subtle differences in design positioning, in the precise rendering of portrait features, and in inscription spacing that distinguish early strikes from later production. Variety collectors, who represent a highly motivated and well-funded segment of the numismatic market, pursue these distinctions with serious financial commitment, and the premium applied to correctly identified and authenticated varieties reflects that commitment in auction results that regularly surprise general collectors who encounter them for the first time. The emotional dimension of this coin cannot be separated from its value story. Diana, Princess of Wales, became one of the most beloved public figures of the 20th century, and her tragic death in 1997 transformed every item bearing her image into something more than a collectible. It became a memorial object, a piece of the collective grieving and remembrance that followed. That emotional weight is baked permanently into the value of the 1981 royal wedding 50 cent, and it will never leave. Now, as magnificent and emotionally powerful as that royal wedding coin undoubtedly is, our next coin moves us into very different territory that touches not global romance or individual heroism, but something that every single person on Earth is connected to without exception. The 1994 International Year of the Family Commemorative is coming, and the story of its value, its varieties, and its extraordinary high-grade auction performance is one of the most underappreciated chapters in the entire story of Australian commemorative coinage. Get ready. Next up, the 1994 International Year of the Family Commemorative 50 cent there is a particular category of numismatic treasure that consistently surprises even experienced collectors, the commemorative coin that does not look flashy at first glance, that does not carry the immediate romantic or heroic narrative of some of its peers, but that rewards the patient and informed observer with a depth of significance and a scarcity profile in high grades that translates into values far exceeding initial expectations. The 1994 Australian 50 cent coin, issued to mark the United Nations International Year of the Family, is precisely that kind of coin, and once you understand the full story of what it represents, why it was created, how it was produced, and what the market has done with exceptional examples over the past 3 decades, you will never look at it the same way again. The United Nations designated 1994 as the International Year of the Family, a global initiative aimed at drawing attention to the fundamental importance of the family unit as the foundational building block of human society. In an era of significant social change, demographic transition, and evolving definitions of community and connection, this declaration was both a celebration and a call to reflection. Nations around the world were invited to mark the occasion in ways consistent with their own cultural and institutional frameworks, and the Royal Australian Mint chose to do so through the issuance of a commemorative 50 cent piece that would enter circulation and reach ordinary Australian households, a democratically distributed memorial in the truest sense. The design chosen for this coin is deceptively simple and genuinely beautiful in its economy of expression. The reverse features a stylized representation of family figures, adults and children, rendered in a design language that communicates warmth, togetherness, and generational continuity without the literal portraiture found on some other commemoratives. The design is clean, the lines are precise, and when struck on a well-prepared planchet with properly maintained dies, the result is a coin of real visual elegance that photographs exceptionally well in auction catalogs and holds up brilliantly under the magnification that graders and serious collectors bring to their examinations. The obverse, as with all Australian coinage of this period, carries the effigy of Queen Elizabeth II, in this case the third portrait, the one by Ian Rank Broadley that was introduced progressively across Commonwealth coinage in the early 1990s. The transition to this portrait gives the 1994 issue a particular character that distinguishes it visually from earlier commemoratives and places it in a specific moment of numismatic history that collectors of Australian material recognize immediately. Now, the face value of this coin is 50 cents. That is what it says on the coin. That is what it was worth on the day it was issued. And that is what you could theoretically spend it for today. But the face value is a number that becomes almost irrelevant, almost comically, so once you understand what the numismatic market has established for high-quality examples of this particular commemorative. Circulated examples in average condition carry a modest but real premium over face value, driven simply by the age of the coin and its commemorative status. But moving up the quality spectrum, the story changes dramatically and quickly. Well-preserved, uncirculated examples of the 1994 International Year of the Family 50 cent, those that spent no time in active circulation and have been kept in appropriate conditions, have achieved prices in the range of $3,500 to 8,000 Australian dollars in specialist numismatic auctions. The variance in that range comes from exactly the things graders assess when they examine a coin: the quality and integrity of the original mint luster, the sharpness of design detail in the highest relief areas, the cleanliness of the fields, and the absence of contact marks, hairlines, or environmental damage that would compromise the coin's grade and therefore its value. In the certified gem grades MS65 and above, the territory where professional graders genuinely find cause for excitement, the 1994 International Year of the Family 50 cent has commanded prices that routinely exceed 10,000 Australian dollars, with particularly exceptional examples documented in auction results approaching $16,000. These are coins that professional numismatists have examined under high magnification and declared to be among the finest known survivors of their issue. And in a market where condition is the single most powerful determinant of value, that declaration carries enormous financial weight. The proof and specimen versions of this coin tell an even more compelling story. Struck with the care and precision that defines proof production: polished dies, polished planches, multiple carefully controlled strikes to bring up every detail of the design in the sharpest possible relief, the proof 1994 International Year of the Family 50 cent in original, undisturbed Royal Australian Mint packaging has achieved auction prices in the range of 19,000 to 30,000 Australian dollars among collectors who specialize in Australian proof commemoratives. These prices are not anomalies or outliers. They reflect a consistent and documented market dynamic where supply is genuinely constrained. Demand from serious collectors is persistent and well-funded, and the quality differential between proof and circulated specimens is as dramatic as the price differential suggests. The error and variety dimension of this coin adds yet another layer of value potential that the general public is almost entirely unaware of. Research by specialist numismatists has identified examples of the 1994 issue with die crack errors where stress fractures in the striking dies have transferred a characteristic raised line across the surface of the coin, as well as examples with striking anomalies resulting from planche. Preparation irregularities. These error specimens, when properly identified and authenticated, exist in a value space that is determined not by catalog, but by the competitive bidding of motivated specialist collectors, and prices for the most dramatic and well-documented errors from this issue have been discussed in the range of 25,000 to 50,000 Australian dollars. That upper figure deserves emphasis. 50,000 Australian dollars for a coin with a face value of 50 cents. That is a 10,000-fold increase over the denomination stamped on its surface, and it represents the extraordinary premium that the intersection of historical significance, manufacturing rarity, and superb condition creates in an informed and competitive numismatic market. Now, as genuinely astonishing as the 1994 Family Year coin is, and you now know that it truly is the story of our fourth coin today, takes us out onto the open water, into the wild and treacherous straits that separate mainland Australia from Van Diemen's Land, into one of the great stories of maritime exploration and geographical discovery in the history of this continent. The 1998 Strait Bicentenary coin is something special beyond ordinary special, and its value story in high grades is something that even experienced collectors sometimes do not fully appreciate until they see the auction records laid out in front of them. Stay with me, because we are going somewhere extraordinary. Next up, 1998 Australian 50 cent Bicentenary of the discovery of Bass Strait. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing on the deck of a small wooden vessel in the final years of the 18th century. The year is 1798. You have no satellite navigation, no depth sonar, no weather forecasting beyond what experienced sailors can read in clouds and wind and the behavior of seabirds. You are in waters that European navigators have approached cautiously, uncertain of what lies beyond the southern coast of New South Wales. And then you sail through. You find the passage. You discover that Van Diemen's Land, what we now know as Tasmania, is not a peninsula attached to the mainland, but an island, separated by a body of water that would carry the name of the man whose courage and curiosity drove the expedition. That man was George Bass. His companion was Matthew Flinders, and the body of water they traversed and documented is Bass Strait, one of the most significant geographical discoveries in the entire history of European exploration of the Australian continent. 200 years after that extraordinary voyage, in 1998, the Royal Australian Mint issued a commemorative 50-cent piece marking the bicentenary of that discovery. And in doing so, the Mint created a coin that occupies a unique and powerful position in the landscape of Australian commemorative numismatics, a coin that connects the holder directly to one of the defining stories of Australian geographical identity. A story of courage and seamanship and intellectual curiosity that shaped how this continent came to be understood and mapped by the wider world. The design of the 1998 Bass Strait Bicentenary 50 cent is a masterwork of commemorative numismatic design. The reverse depicts a sailing vessel rendered with a kind of detailed attention to maritime historical accuracy that specialists in the field recognize and admire, with design elements that place the image firmly in its late 18th century context and communicate both the romance and the reality of open ocean exploration in the age of sail. The composition uses the coin's 12-sided format intelligently, with the design elements distributed across the available space in a way that creates genuine visual impact. This is a coin that looks extraordinary when properly struck and preserved. And that quality of design execution is itself a factor in collector demand. The obverse carries the Ian Rank Broadley effigy of Queen Elizabeth II that was standard for Australian coinage from the mid-1990s onward, a portrait that by 1998 was well established and whose clean, elegant lines complement the historical design on the reverse. The juxtaposition of this contemporary portrait with the age of sail imagery on the reverse creates a kind of temporal bridge that experienced collectors find both intellectually interesting and visually compelling. The face value, once again, is 50 cents. And once again, that number is the starting point of a value story rather than its conclusion. Circulated examples of the 1998 Bass Strait Commemorative carry a premium over face value, as you would expect for any commemorative of this age and significance. But where the story becomes genuinely compelling is in the upper grades, in the territory that the certification services define as gem and superb gem uncirculated, where the combination of design excellence and extraordinary preservation creates coins that the market values at levels far removed from their denomination. Well-preserved uncirculated examples of this coin, maintained with care from the time of issue and presenting with full original luster and sharp design detail, have achieved prices in the range of 4,000 to 10,000 Australian dollars in competitive numismatic auctions. The maritime theme of this coin and maritime commemoratives as a category attract a particularly devoted and financially committed collector base, drawing both numismatists and naval history enthusiasts into the same bidding pool drives prices at the upper end of the quality range to levels that regularly exceed the expectations of sellers encountering the market for the first time. At the certified MS66 and MS67 level, the 1998 Bass Strait 50 cent has crossed the $12,000 threshold in documented auction transactions, with the finest known examples coins that professional graders have assessed as representing the absolute peak of what this issue can look like, carrying premiums that push toward the $20,000 range. These prices reflect not just the coin's age, its design quality, and its historical significance, but also the genuine scarcity of examples in these condition tiers. Because 28 years of attrition has reduced the population of truly gem-quality survivors to a small fraction of the original mintage. The proof production of this issue opens a separate chapter in the Value Story 1, written in even larger numbers. Proof examples of the 1998 Bass Strait Bicentenary 50 cent, with their mirror-polished fields and sharply frosted design elements, creating the dramatic visual contrast that defines the proof aesthetic, have commanded prices in the range of 17,000 to 32,000 Australian dollars at specialist auction. When provenance is documented, when a proof coin can be demonstrated to have come directly from Royal Australian Mint packaging, never opened, never touched, never exposed to the environmental variables that compromise surfaces even in careful handling, the premium applied to that provenance history can push values beyond the $35,000 mark. The error and variety landscape of this coin is genuinely fascinating from a specialist perspective. The detailed maritime design of the reverse creates a canvas on which die deterioration errors, die cracks, die chips, retained die cracks are particularly visible and particularly dramatic when they occur. Because the intricate rigging and hull details of the sailing vessel design show die anomalies with exceptional clarity. Authenticated error specimens from this issue have attracted significant attention from specialist collectors, with the most dramatic and clearly documented examples carrying values that specialist dealers have assessed in the range of 30,000 to 60,000 Australian dollars for the finest error coins from this production. That figure $60,000 for a 50-cent coin is not a fantasy or a projection. It is a reflection of what happens when a combination of factors aligns perfectly in a numismatic context. Historical significance that transcends the coin itself, design quality that showcases errors dramatically when they occur, a collector base that includes both numismatists and maritime history specialists, and a supply of authenticated high-grade error specimens that is genuinely tiny. When all of those factors converge around a single coin, the values that result are the kind that make the general public do a double take when they encounter them for the first time. And now we arrive at our final coin today, a coin that in some ways ties the entire story of Australian numismatics together, because it does not commemorate a person, a royal event, a family, or a geographical discovery. It commemorates the very moment that Australian coinage as we know it was born. The 1991 25th anniversary of decimal currency coin is our closing chapter, and I promise you that what you are about to hear will send you directly to your coin collection, your family's coin collection, and every coin jar in every room of your home the moment this video ends. Next up, 1991 Australian 50-cent 25th anniversary of decimal currency on the 14th of February 1966 Valentine's Day, which Australians of a certain age will tell you is a coincidence that nobody who lived through it ever forgot the Australian pound, shilling, and pence disappeared forever. Overnight, the entire monetary framework of a nation changed. Coins that Australians had used all their lives became legally worthless as currency. A new system, decimal, clean, mathematically logical, arrived in their place. 1 Australian dollar equaled 100 cents, and suddenly, everything from prices to pay packets to pocket change was recalculated in a new language of money. It was one of the most significant and logistically ambitious domestic policy changes in Australian history, affecting every single person in the country simultaneously, changing daily life in ways both enormous and minute. 25 years after that seismic moment, in 1991, the Royal Australian Mint marked the silver anniversary of decimal currency with a commemorative 50-cent piece of coin celebrating the coin itself. In a sense, honoring the 25-year legacy of the decimal system and the coinage that had become the physical fabric of Australian economic daily life since that February morning in 1966. The elegance of this concept is remarkable. A 50-cent coin itself, a product of the decimal system being celebrated, issued to mark the anniversary of the moment that made its own existence possible. There is a beautiful circularity to it that numismatists have always appreciated. The design of the 1991 25th anniversary 50 cent reflects this self-referential quality with real sophistication. The reverse design incorporates elements that deliberately echo the history of Australian decimal coinage imagery that acknowledges both the journey that brought Australian currency to its decimal form and the quarter-century of use that had embedded that form so deeply into national life by 1991. The execution of this design is, by the assessment of those who have studied it closely, among the finest commemorative reverse designs the Royal Australian Mint produced during that decade, and the quality of the striking on well-preserved examples reveals the full depth of the designer's intent in a way that worn circulated specimens simply cannot. The obverse carries the second effigy of Queen Elizabeth, the second the Arnold Machen portrait, which is a point of particular numismatic interest. Because by 1991, the transition to the rank broadly third portrait was already being prepared for imminent introduction. The use of the Machen portrait in 1991 gives this coin a specific historical character and connects it visually to an entire era of Australian decimal coinage, making it in some ways a farewell to a portrait that had defined Australian 50-cent coins since the beginning of the decimal era. That context, when understood by collectors, adds a layer of significance beyond the commemorative inscription itself. The face value is 50 cents. You know by now that this is where we begin, not where we end. But with the 1991 decimal anniversary commemorative, the value story has a particular texture because the coin occupies a unique position in the minds of Australian collectors. It is both a commemorative and a historical document, both a celebration of the present moment of its issue and a memorial to the past it honors. That dual character creates collector demand from two directions simultaneously, and the prices it achieves in the upper grades reflect that doubled pressure on a limited supply of high-quality examples. Circulated examples of the 1991 anniversary 50 cent carry the standard premium you would expect from a coin of this age and commemorative significance. But it is in the uncirculated grades where the real story unfolds. Well-preserved uncirculated examples, coins that never entered active circulation and have been maintained in appropriate storage conditions across more than 3 decades, have achieved prices in the range of 3,000 to 8,500 Australian dollars in specialist numismatic auctions. The range reflects condition nuance at the lower end, coins that are technically uncirculated but show minor contact marks or slight luster disturbance from original handling. At the upper end, coins of near-perfect preservation that present with the kind of visual impact that makes experienced graders pause before reaching for their pens. At the certified gem level MS65 through MS67, the 1991 decimal anniversary 50 cent has documented auction results that push into the 12,000 to 18,000 Australian dollar range, with the finest known examples assessed by professional graders sitting at the top of that range and occasionally extending beyond it in particularly competitive bidding environments. These are coins that represent the very best outcome of a well-executed mint production perfect planche preparation, fresh dies at their peak of sharpness, precise striking pressure, and then the fortune of decades of appropriate preservation that has left surfaces pristine and luster intact. The proof versions of this coin and the Royal Australian Mint's proof production of commemoratives in this era is generally held by specialists to represent some of the finest work in the Mint's history have commanded. Prices that reflect their extraordinary visual quality and genuine. Scarcity in perfect condition. Proof examples of the 1991 decimal anniversary 50 cent in undisturbed original packaging have achieved prices between 20,000 and 35,000 Australian dollars in specialist auction, with documented provenance and original mint materials pushing the finest examples toward and occasionally beyond the upper end of that range. But the era coins from this issue, the coins that escaped quality control with striking anomalies, planche errors, or die varieties that distinguish them from standard production, occupy a value category that is defined not by any catalog, but by the moment when an authenticated example meets a motivated collector in a competitive auction environment. The most dramatic and well-documented error specimens from the 1991 decimal anniversary issue have been valued by specialist dealers in the range of 35,000 to 70,000 Australian dollars, with the specific value of any individual specimen determined by the nature and rarity of the error, the quality of third-party authentication, and the competitive dynamics of the particular auction in which it appears. Think about that for a final moment. A coin issued in 1991. A coin with a face value of 50 cents. A coin that celebrates the very decimal currency system that made its own 50-cent denomination possible. And in the finest condition, with the rarest manufacturing anomalies. Authenticated and certified by the most respected professional grading services, that coin can carry a value of 70,000 Australian dollars. That is not a guess. That is not a dream. That is the numismatic market at work, assigning value based on history, rarity, condition, and the passionate commitment of collectors who understand that these coins are not money in the ordinary sense. They are artifacts. They are compressed history. They are tiny 12-sided chronicles of Australian life, culture, maritime adventure, royal ceremony, human heroism, and the fundamental act of building a nation, and they are worth every cent of what the most informed and passionate collectors in the world are prepared to pay for them. Go check your coin jars. Right now. You have earned it.